Thank you for tuning in to Healing Race. In this video, Andre and I discuss the question, how much do different cultural ways of living based on race create barriers between Black and white Americans and matter in our world today?
Do all people have to learn to follow society's norms in similar ways, or are Black people affected in a unique, particular way? What role do stereotypes about Black people and Black culture play in our need to adapt to those norms? Let's get to that conversation now. Enjoy.
I keep coming back to this idea of the way in which, we could just speak about us two, how white or how Black our networks or our social networks are, right? That being the case for a good number of people in our country, how much that perhaps plays a role in preventing us from getting beyond some of these challenges in racial relationships. Here's why I say this. You shared the way in which you feel people generally, white people and Black people, view you as a Black person when it comes to intelligence or professional success or capability to be successful professionally. And I hear kind of loud and clear coming from you this strong motivation to aspire to that greatness and that success, right? And to, in some ways, represent Black people in a way that would make you and members of the Black community proud, right?
Yes.
And you talked about a lot, and we've talked about in other ways, sticking to your own kind or being in a kind of, at least in your upbringing, one of many environment, in a lot of ways, at least socially, and even still to some extent, that being the case in terms of what your network looks like racially. I wonder how much the sticking to one's own has narratives about how we judge each other be maintained in ways that might actually be different, at least in some circles. What do I mean by that? I even said to you, and I mean this very sincerely, this is regardless of race, I see you as a successful person. Like, I don't see you as needing to prove anything else or to aspire to anything greater, unless you in your own heart desire that for yourself in your life. And I think there would be a good portion of my network of people who are white who would actually see you the same. Now, I'm not suggesting, Andre, that they don't carry bias in some way, that there's not unconscious associations. At the same time, I think they would still see you as successful and capable. And to the extent that our networks are not mixed in the way that we might ideally want, like for our society, for our country, we don't get to see that. Like, you don't get to see the 20, 50, 100 white people in my network who, if they met you and they knew about what you've done in your life, just who you are as a person and as a professional, they would evaluate you in a very positive light. They would, but you don't get to see that, right? And so I wonder the way in which you and I and others, stick to our own too much, or not, sometimes consciously, but sometimes, this is just the networks we're given, how much that plays a role in our beliefs about how others judge us. And again, I'm not saying that it doesn't actually happen. I just think the expectation that it might happen is probably greater than the extent to which the frequency with which it would actually happen. In terms of, this is just my network. And I hear you loud and clear when you share in past episodes how, Todd, you live differently. You grew up in Southern California and you have a particular kind of network that, you very recently came over, has a strong Jewish, I understand that I'm different in certain ways when in compared to the broader white population, but I have networks beyond that. Like, I know people who are not white, people who are not, don't come from the same kind of background that I did, and just know that they would approach you in the same way that I'm describing. And I guess that's why I kind of come back to some of these questions of what drives you to feel like you have to present in a certain way. Like, I used to, I don't know if I ever expressed this to you. I used to pick up your sayings and your tonalities, and it would just come out of me, like when I was back home, or I would say something like, oh, I know what Andre would say about that. He's all that in a bag of chips, right? And we would, no, this can come off, we would laugh about it, but not laughing at you.
You were laughing at me.
It was, that's funny.
Mm-hmm, but you weren't laughing at me.
So you got to understand the comparison of our experiences. You express yourself at university and get rebuffed and feel like you need to change. I am expressing who you are back home, and people are not just accepting, but feeling joy around it, right? That they're, and you got to meet my family. They
yes.
You feel this way, embraced you, right?
Yes, they did.
And probably, hopefully you felt it was somewhat natural.
Yes, it was.
Throwing yourself in a new context is always feeling, unfamiliar and maybe uncomfortable. But so again, I'm trying to understand this different experience because I have a different kind of network, and I've had a different kind of experience in the way that people would appreciate you in being authentically Andre, not in being prepared and contrived Andre to try to fit in socially. And I understand that we're not talking about a professional network. Do you understand why it's a little bit like why I would have this motivation of really trying to understand? And I'm also trying to understand the racial component of it, Andre, because I have adapted. I don't want to make myself out to be someone who has not tried to adapt. When I had my first job, right, I started my own company out of college, had that for about a year, and then I got signed on by a company to do seminars and trainings, right, for sales and customer service. But when I started going out and doing trainings, I didn't wear t-shirts and shorts, certainly. I was up in front of a group. I was super young. I was 21 years old, talking to a lot of older folks. Like, I put the suit shirt on, I put the suit pants on, I put the nice shoes on. I didn't wear the tie because I just couldn't bring myself to do it. But, I cater to that audience. Now, slowly but surely that changed over time, where I was like, okay, I can wear a nice shirt, but not a collar. Like, I could downgrade it a little bit, right? In a way that was comfortable for me, but I did adjust. And I think it's a generally universal experience, other than people who grew up in the kinds of neighborhoods you're talking about, where they're really like prepared in this way to make an adjustment to the professional world. My question, and so given that we all in some way need to adjust to the professional world, right? We all in some way try to adapt ourselves to make sure we're accepted by our clients, our coworkers, and the like. What is it to you that you feel you needed to adjust that was racially defined in some way, that was racially relevant, right? Because I had to adjust, but I'm assuming you think, maybe I shouldn't assume this, that there are components of who you think you are or how you express yourself as a Black person that wasn't accepted. And I'm trying to understand.
That's part of the coming from one of many, right? So what I had to shift what I had to learn was the rules of engagement. The rules of engagement when I was one of few around white people. in certain, not all white people, but in certain settings of white people, right?
Okay.
And I think yes, and so it's a story in multiple dimensions. One of transitioning caste, and then also
which you're defining as like an economic status
situation, right? So when you're around one group of people with rules of engagement and how they express themselves, and then now you're in a higher caste, I guess you say, then that changes. But when you're still representing or showing up, manifesting, using the rules of the lower caste, then there's a tension there. There's a tension in externally with the people with whom you're communicating. And then once you become aware that they have attention, then there's a tension in you. And you have to figure out, number one, how to repair the external situation so that you don't get booted out of the caste, or the caste doesn't close ranks against you. And then number two, you have to learn how to reconcile yourself. So, you learn when and how to present and so forth. And so that's when you ask the question, what do you need to change about yourself racially? And it's not a physical thing, but there's a way of being, even just when you're casual friends with people, and let's say, casual friends with working class Black people, and then you're now among upper class or affluent white people, then you sort of have to become very malleable and read your audience and know how far to go, how far not to go when you're telling a story or whatever, what to reveal, what not to reveal. Like it's very nuanced, and it's not even a dance, it's a ballet. Literally, it's a ballet.
So there's certain ways of expressing yourself that you feel, again, I'm trying to tease apart the economic and the racial. So when I think about J.D. Vance's book, and he talks about all the ways that he had to learn, like how you do silverware at a really nice dinner.
You should see my table right now.
Yeah.
That was the reason I was late to our conversation.
You were setting it up.
Yes. So I was staging the table, and I staged it exactly what, in this example, like you're talking about. And you have to understand, I was not taught that, but I had to learn that so that when I host people, I know how to host them to their expectation.
Yeah. So I still don't know how to do that. I never learned that. Anyways, my point.
And you white.
That's why this is so foreign to me. This is just why it's so foreign to me. But let's just take what you are saying in terms of adapting is very similar to what I read in J.D. Vance's book. And so what you're talking about is this kind of increase of economic mobility or economic status, right? And so I'm trying to pull that apart from what you feel is racial. And so you feel, it sounds like there are some ways of expressing yourself that you would express that are natural to express within your Black community or in the Black community at large, that if you express in that way, if you express in that way, you would be rebuffed. Because I just thought of a funny story that involves the two of us. Okay.
And that's good, because I love, my favorite topic of conversation is food, by the way.
Yeah.
And so let's go on the lines of food. I remember when I went home. I remember when I went home with you once during university.
Yeah.
And we were hanging out at one of your friends' house. And I think we had gotten some like McDonald's. Okay. Where I come from, you eat the burger out of the box. And I'll never forget, I won't mention his name. I remember his name, but I won't mention it. When your friend was like, "Oh, don't you want a plate?" And I said, "No, I'll just eat out." I said, "No, you want a plate." And I remember that. And I remember like, "Oh, you eat things off of a plate. You don't just eat out of the box." Okay. Yeah. And fast forward to all these years later, my brother was at my house. Oh my God. And we were having a meal. It was just me and my three brothers, no mother, no anything like that. And keep in mind, we never hosted fancy meals. We never even laid silverware on the table. You opened the drawer, got the silverware when you were ready to sit down and eat. Yeah. And my brother was eating without a knife. And I just yelled his name. I said, whatever. And he just whipped his head around. And I said, "Use a knife." And he said, you just yelled at me like I thought I was in trouble. Because I said, "Brian." And he whipped his head around. I said, "Use a knife." And that really comes from my interaction with being in white upper class environments and
I guess,
not.
how do you pull apart the racial component in the economic?
You can't pull that. But for me, for white people, maybe you can. For me, you can't pull it apart because
Yeah, I don't think you can, because when you express, like, I never ate, at least not in any kind of, regular way, burgers on a plate. Like, you ate them in the pack, in the little wrapper that came with it, right? Like, that's how you ate it, right? I mean, so I relate, and that's why I'm for really trying to understand. I'm not saying there's not a racial component to it. I'm really trying to understand what is a black way of being and what's a white way of being.
Well, no, what I'll tell you to help you understand is not necessarily a black way and a white way, but there have been so many sort of tropes and memes about black people are this and black people are that. That's why I'm hyper conscious of it. Like, for example, black people eating fried chicken. Because I asked my friends and said, we're going to premiere the show on Juneteenth. Do you think that's disrespectful? And one friend said, as long as you're not eating fried chicken and watermelon, I think you're good. Because what's the one, they love fried chicken. First of all, I've been all around the world. Every culture has some form of fried chicken, like some form of it, right? I remember, I'll never forget, I was in Bangkok, Thailand, coming out of a nightclub, and a Thai woman had an open drum, a large pot on a propane burner, frying chicken outside the nightclub. And I was like, I'll be darned. And then here we are, black people are supposed to be these big lipped, watermelon loving, chicken eating people. And I'm like, this is a smear campaign.
So the consciousness around ways of being as it relates to race it relates to a consciousness of not reflecting the tropes that are out there, so that you don't get those associations.
Yes.
Because what I'm trying to understand is, like, if you went across the country, white, black, or otherwise, you would get a whole range of different cultural ways of being. And I'm not, and I understand that professionally there are certain norms that exist, norms that, like I said, I didn't grow up with, or maybe to a small extent, my parents tried to, get me to dress up nice and at certain points in time, but it was very, very, very little. I remember one time we went to a cotillion class, like to learn dance of some kind. And it just, like, I never went back. Like, there's no way are you kidding?
This is not me.
I mean, I actually wound up learning social dance just because it was fun, but this kind of proper way of that was just like so far from the way I grew up. To try to inculcate anything like that into me was just not happening. So I'm I understand that these norms, but I also think there are just lots of variation in cultural communities, and we all have to adapt in different ways. And so I'm really trying to understand, is there a black-white divide here, or is there just...
There is one. No, there is one.
So what is it?
You're right.
Other than the tropes, are the tropes or what?
All the other races of people with variation of cultural being and manifestation are not being showcased and denigrated as publicly as we are.
So I think I'm understanding now. There are certain cultural expressions that have derogatory associations, and then there's the general derogatory associations of how people have viewed, or at least white racist people have viewed white people, lazy, or...
You mean white racist people have viewed black people?
Sorry, white racists have viewed black people.
I told my friends, criminals, stupid, and lazy. I told my friends.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is, if in any way a cultural expression either played into something that was made fun of culturally, or played into those general stereotypes, you and other members of the Black community have felt and still feel a motivation, a pressure to conform in a way where you won't be seen in that way.
That is what I'm saying.
I see.
What I colloquially call, because I love the way I express myself, bringing the tilly tally.
The what?
The tilly tally.
What is that?
The tilly tally. And what the tilly tally is because we used to have a saying among Black people, we would say so-and-so is proper. Like, oh, they proper. What proper meant is you showed up in such a way to be mannerable. Like, you were the antithesis of what even Black people maybe themselves thought about themselves. All those negative tropes and negative memes. So you bring your best language, you present your, and when you're at your home, your best china, you make sure that you can be seen as an exemplar of a human being. Yeah, do that again. Not an exemplar in your profession, not an exemplar in your school, but an exemplar just as a human being.
I see.
That's what we carry around.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I understand. I understand. So
I'm like, we go to work on this show.
Yeah.
Healing Race, we go to work because this is deep. This is really deep. I mean, until I've been crying for half of this.
Yeah, I mean,
it's emotional to bring this up.
Yeah, I mean, even the term that you're using is best, right? The best way of speaking, or the best, and the question then becomes, what's the best way? I mean, I feel empathy because I often get criticized for whether I'm being proper. I don't know if I get criticized for the way I speak, but
you don't.
But I can understand. And again, it's really hard for me to fully understand this because I just know how I think people, in certain people, at least in my network, have or would accept you, however you express yourself. And so I'm trying to understand what are the contexts where this really needs to happen, right? And what are the contexts where it doesn't need to happen? And my sense from you in our other conversations is it's too much energy to even figure out where you can be yourself, whatever that means culturally and personally, and where you need to be proper in these ways. And so might as well be on the safe side and show up in those ways as show up in that proper way that follows the norms in case it might be a situation where you need to do so. Am I right in that?
Yes.
Thank you for watching this episode of Healing Race, and stay with us for a scene from our next video.
If you want to see more conversations like the one you just watched, please subscribe to our channel, share this video with friends and family, and like and comment on the video below.
If you'd like to be a guest on one of our episodes and have an open, real conversation about race, email us at guests@healingraceshow.com.
And if there are topics you think we should cover, we'd love to hear them. So please email your ideas to topics@healingraceshow.com.
As always, thanks for your support. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Now, here's a scene from our next Healing Race. Here's the question, I guess, that I would have around identity, because I talked in the last episode of having a very weak connection, if almost no connection, to whiteness as an identity of myself, right? And I hear you that people perceive me that way, and then that comes with certain things. In your ideal world, if you can wave a magic wand about the way things are, would you identify with your color? Like, would that even be an identity?
To watch the rest of that episode, go ahead and click the video below me.
To see a different compelling Healing Race episode, you can click the video below me. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.